What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron. If you are scouring the internet looking for rankings before your fantasy football draft, this is the place for you because today I am going to rank my top 60 wide receivers for fantasy football. We're going to go player by player, tier by tier, and talk about the entire landscape as I see it. This is the biggest tier list I've done on the channel, so if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new. And the first player, the first wide receiver we're going to talk about is Ja'Marr Chase. He is in the wide receiver 1 overall tier. Now, I feel much stronger about the tier breaks than I do player A versus player B within each tier. So feel free to shake up however I have them ordered within each tier. But this is where I see the overall tier breaks and values at the position. Ja'Marr Chase in the wide receiver 1 overall tier. These are guys that you can interchange as the number 1 receiver in fantasy. Of course, Ja'Marr Chase, the most obvious candidate. He finished wide receiver 1 overall last season, Triple Crown winner. He's in the exact same situation tied to Joe Burrow and a bad defense. He should be very easily in the 20-plus point per game area as it pertains to PPR. Now, I will say these are for PPR leagues, but you can absolutely use them for half PPR leagues. And my entire rankings list you can find over on the Patreon. I have my top 200 rankings cheat sheet there, my tiers, my target rounds for every player, my targets, my fades, all of that good stuff. It is the same cheat sheet I use in all of my own drafts. You can find that patreon.com/Ron Stewart in the description and the comment section down below. Now, at wide receiver 2, we have CeeDee Lamb. And I got killed for this the other day for saying that Ja'Marr Chase had a weak Triple Crown season. And when we look at fantasy point per game producers, he did. Ja'Marr Chase had the 8th best point per game season since the year 2000. Cooper Kupp's Triple Crown season was the best. CeeDee Lamb actually outscored him in points per game in 2023, and that's the point I was trying to make, that as recently as 2023, CeeDee Lamb had the same caliber of wide receiver 1 overall season. We just don't really view him that way. So CeeDee Lamb absolutely has wide receiver 1 overall in his range of outcomes. They just trade away Michael Parsons today. They're going to throw the ball a ton inside of a dome. So even with George Pickens, I think CeeDee Lamb is absolutely a candidate to go as high as the wide receiver 1 overall, and he is personally my 103 in my rankings. Then at wide receiver 3, we have Justin Jefferson. I can't put him any lower than this. He's played 77 career games this far, and he has the most PPR points among any wide receiver through 77 career games. After him, it's Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, Jerry Rice, Randy Moss. That's the kind of trajectory that Justin Jefferson is on. And over his entire career, his 17-game pace, just his average, even including his rookie year, is 109 receptions, 1,641 yards, and 9 touchdowns. That would be good for 19.2 points per game. In most years, that's anywhere from a top 3 to a top 5 finish at wide receiver. I get that there's a hamstring concern. I get that we all don't really know what to expect from J.J. McCarthy, but Justin Jefferson has had that 17-game pace with multiple different quarterbacks, from Kirk Cousins to Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins to Sam Darnold last year. KOC makes it work. Justin Jefferson makes it work. I don't think that it's smart to overthink it past the number 3 wide receiver in fantasy football, which then brings us to the wide receiver 1 tier. These are guys that I just think are fine, top 12 option. You put them in your wide receiver 1 slot, and it feels good. With Puka Nacua, he is my wide receiver 4 this year. When we look at per route metrics, he is maybe the most impressive wide receiver in football in terms of PFF grade, in terms of targets per out run. No one else on this list has a 30% plus targets per out run. He was at 37%. He was at 16% first downs per out run. No one else clearing 15%. And then 3.56 yards per out run. No one else clearing 3. This is a special talent heading into the 3rd year of his career. He was the wide receiver 2 in points per game already last year. This would be, to me, where he makes his jump into wide receiver 1 overall territory. But of course, there are some injury concerns. Puka Nacua has his own injury concerns, along with Matthew Stafford. So it's a bit of a parlay, but the upside is as high as anybody in this tier when it comes to Puka Nacua. Next up at wide receiver 5, I have Nico Collins for the Texans. Very similar situation. You can see per route, not quite as crazy as Puka, but 28% targets per out run, 13.7% first downs per out run, 2.87 yards per out run are all really strong numbers. Now, why do I care about any of this? PFF grade, how does he look on film? Targets per out run, how much volume are you getting per route? First downs per out run, are you not only being efficient, but are you moving the chains and being an engine within your offense? And then yards per out run, are you making big plays? He qualifies across the board. He now gets CJ Stroud, new offensive coordinator. We already saw last year that he had 21.3 points per game through his 5 weeks before getting hurt. If Nico Collins can stay healthy, he can absolutely give you 20-plus points per game as a true difference maker at receiver. Now, somebody probably getting slept on is Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is at my wide receiver 6 spot, super high floor, Really good offense. I got that comment yesterday that, yes, the Lions lost some offensive linemen and they lost their offensive coordinator, but they're still projected by Las Vegas to score inside the top 6 of the best offenses in football. They're going to have plenty of dome games. All the infrastructure of Dan Campbell and Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's all still there. I think it's overthinking to think that the Lions won't still be a good offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the last 2 years, 18.6 points per game, 20.7 points per game as the wide receiver 4 in both seasons. So wide receiver 6 feels about right for him. Then at wide receiver 7, I have Brian Thomas Jr. He had the 9th best rookie point per game season since 1998, and he did that with 7 games of Mac Jones. I almost said Josh Allen, but of Mac Jones, which is just absolutely nuts. When we look at his per route metrics among rookies, really strong targets per out run, around 25%. He led the entire class in yards per out run, 10% plus first downs per out run, 80 plus PFF grade across the board. An absolute monster. Now he gets Liam Cohen from the Bucs. He gets a healthy Trevor Lawrence. And Mike Clay, who is the ESPN projections guy, has the Jaguars inside the top 10 in terms of pass attempts and passing yards this season. There should be plenty of volume for Brian Thomas to eat. Now at the wide receiver 8, we have Malik Neighbors. And some might say that this is a little bit low for Neighbors, and it absolutely is, and I'll get into that in a second. But I'm going to get yelled at for having Neighbors this low, but then I also get yelled at for not straying from consensus and essentially copying ADP on the rankings. So you got to let me know which way you want to have it. Do you actually want my rankings, or do you just want the safe ADP picks? Because I've gotten that comment a ton, but I'm giving you guys, these are my rankings. This is how I am drafting in fantasy football. Malik Neighbors is really good. We can see his rookie year numbers all really strong as well. Best targets per out run, 2+ yards per out run, just shy of first downs per out run in the 10% area. Best PFF grade among the wide receivers on this list, but the Giants offense is worse than the Jaguars in terms of Brian Thomas Jr. situation. Mike Clay has this offense projected outside of the top 20 in pass attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. You're going to have either a rookie quarterback in Jackson Dart or Russell Wilson. This team is going to thrive off of playing defense, right? They just got Abdul Carter, and they got Brian Burns up front, and they got Dexter Lawrence. They have a very good defensive unit that is going to keep them in games, and there's not going to be as much garbage time for the Giants. Then at wide receiver 9, in our next tier of low-end wide receiver 1s, I'm fine with these guys as my wide receiver 1s, but it doesn't feel as strong as these top 8. We have Drake London, who, if you want to put him up here, you absolutely can. To me, he's like kind of midway between both. He has great per route metrics himself. You can see from this list, 90 plus PFF grade, 27% targets per out run, 12% first downs per out run, 2+ yards per out run. Really, really good. Last year, we already saw him hit 19.3 points per game, and I believe a 5-game sample with Michael Penix. He was at 15.4 points per game before that. It's only a 5-game sample, but he could absolutely jump up to 19, 20+ points per game, be a top 6 wide receiver in fantasy. It's just that we haven't really seen it yet is why I'm moving him here. And I think that the year 2 potential of Brian Thomas and Neighbors is a little bit more interesting to me personally. I also think that this offensive environment, they lose Caleb McGarry up front. This offensive line is bad. And this offense lives and dies by Michael Penix. I'm open to Penix being good and having a year 2 breakout, but it's far from a sure thing. After that, we have A.J. Brown, who I'll just leave this chart up for. He is somebody who's a monster as well, like 14% first downs per out run, almost 3+ yards per out run. He is good. He is one of the best wide receivers in football. He deserves to be up here from a pure talent standpoint. This is as low as I can put him when it comes to his offense. It's going to be low passing volume. He has Jalen Hurts. He's going to be competing against Devontae Smith, but he is a very, very good player who has a very high floor. He's finished as the wide receiver 12, wide receiver 8, and wide receiver 8 over his last 3 seasons in terms of points per game. Then our last wide receiver in this tier is going to be Ladd McConkey, who is very similar to the other rookies that we've talked about, right, with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. He is in that same category in terms of targets per out run, yards per out run, first downs per out run. He just didn't have the same type of production, whereas Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors were top 12 wide receiver options last year. Ladd was more of a late blooming wide receiver 2, I would call him. They also bring in Keenan Allen, which isn't the end of the world, but we also do love the schemed up slot usage for a guy like Ladd McConkey, and inherently Keenan Allen is going to take some of those reps and some of those looks away. I'm nitpicking here, but it's why Ladd McConkey is wide receiver 11 and a tier behind the other 2 rookie wide receivers up there. Then that brings us to the high-end wide receiver 2 tier. These are guys that I'd much prefer in my wide receiver 2 spot instead of my wide receiver 1 spot. They feel much cozier as wide receiver 2s, but sometimes you go 2 to 3 running backs up top, and these guys end up in your wide receiver 1 slot. first up, wide receiver 12, we have T. Higgins. Last year, we actually saw him finish in like this area with 18 plus points per game. I definitely understand that there are some durability concerns. He is somebody who gets hurt. He's somebody who misses time. But when he plays within this offense, even next to Jamar Chase, he is still a difference maker. He's going to average anywhere from like 15 to 18 points per game and be really solid. But 20 plus is probably not in his range of outcomes without a Jamar Chase injury. We're going to have a lot of volume with a bad defense. It should set up very well for T. Higgins. Then at wide receiver 13, I keep moving him up, is honestly Mike Evans. This is a very good player, still at the peak of his powers. I really liked this Matt Harmon blurb on Mike Evans saying that he's one of the coolest players in the league because he entered the NFL as an absolute freak show, right? This is somebody who's like 6'4", 230 pounds, could run in a straight line super fast, but he's now become this very savvy route runner where he set a career high in success rate versus man coverage, 84th percentile versus press. He had an above average, an average or better success rate on every route type. So this is now like a true technician and a master of his craft. As cool as that is to say about Mike Evans, and he's already coming off a year where he was the wide receiver 10 in points per game. I got him wide receiver 13 at this point, and this Chris Godwin stuff does not seem good. I know that he avoided the pup, but he's unexpected back until week 5 or later, and then even then he has to ramp up and get back to his previous self, and I'm just kind of betting against that if I'm being honest with you. So Mike Evans feels absolutely fine to me here as like a late third-round pick as my wide receiver 13. Then we can talk about Devontae Adams at wide receiver 14. He's coming off a wide receiver 9 point per game season, despite brutal quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers. You just need Matthew Stafford to stay healthy. He's still at 80th percentile markers versus man, press, on reception perception. It's just the downside of age, right? We've seen this story before. Julio Jones on the Titans comes to mind. Allen Robinson on the Rams comes to mind. Things could get really spooky here, or he could squeak out another top 12 finish in a good offense. And if Puka was to get hurt, Devontae Adams would then have 20-plus wide receiver 1 overall type of upside in terms of his point per game output. Then we have wide receiver 15, Tyreek Hill. And I've actually moved him down a bunch since we last did one of these tier lists. The vibes are just bad. He's had like an oblique injury all offseason. Doesn't seem like him and Tua get along. The Mike McDaniel press conferences aren't great. But the upside is clearly there. Like, this is the quintessential boom-bust pick where if Tyreek Hill hits, he's only a season removed from a 23.5 point per game season on 3.82 yards per out run. We're going to get a lot of passing volume from this Miami offense. If it clicks, we could see 20-plus points per game. If it doesn't, we could see one of the worst picks in fantasy football for Tyreek Hill. Then we move on to just my fine wide receiver 2s. First up being JSN as our wide receiver 16. I think he's a fine player, but he didn't clear 2+ yards per out run. Like on a per route basis, he wasn't great last year, and he now gets a really rough passing environment. You get Clint Kubiak as the OC who wants to run the ball a ton. You get Mike McDonald who wants to run the ball and play defense. And then you get Sam Darnold who looked good with KOC. We'll see how he looks with Clint Kubiak. If he was to get benched, Jalen Milroe would then nuke this passing offense even more. So it's really tough for me to buy in on JSN, but from a zoomed out perspective, he was the wide receiver 17 in points per game last year. I have him wide receiver 16, and he's heading into year 3 and can absolutely take a step forward and beat this ranking. I just have some concerns about the situation. At wide receiver 17, we have Teteroa McMillan. He is the clear wide receiver 1 on this offense. They just traded away Adam Thielen, top 10 pick at wide receiver. He can be a stud, very similar to what Brian Thomas Jr. was last year. This is a 6'4", number 1 wide receiver, produced all 3 years at Arizona, and fits in very nicely to Dave Canales' offense here. 18, Terry McLaurin. There's some downside that because of the contract dispute, he starts slow, but I do think that Terry McLaurin is one of these guys where he's such like a pro's pro and like between the ears veteran that I just don't think that he's going to start all that slow. I think he's a fine wide receiver 2. He's attached to Jaden Daniels in a good offense. Yes, is he due for maybe touchdown regression this year? Sure, after 13, but it's going to be a good scoring offense. So he could easily score 10-plus touchdowns again as a top 15 option at the position. Then at wide receiver 19, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. And he's really tough for me to bet on. He was the wide receiver 39 in points per game last year. I have him wide receiver 19, so I'm pushing him up 20 spots here, but there's so much downside. He could improve on wide receiver 39 and still finishes like wide receiver 27 and be a pretty brutal pick at wide receiver 19. So he's someone that I've been fading a ton, but this is where I have him ranked on my own cheat sheet. He's someone who doesn't really create separation. 33% of his targets were contested, a lot of 50-50 balls, And those just aren't the looks that Kyler is all that crazy about. On top of that, he doesn't get the layups, right? He's not getting any fun bubble screens or like putting Marvin Harrison in motion. It's go line up on the outside, be an X, and win that way, which when you're Nico Collins, that can work. But I don't think that Marvin Harrison Jr. is there yet. And I also don't think Kyler is the same level of quarterback as CJ Stroud. You can also see these stats here that I think are pretty good. Marvin Harrison Jr. ran the 19th highest vertical route percentage on those, 83rd percentile in separation score, or just 83rd among 106 wide receivers in separation score, 49th in win rate, 59th in yards per out run, and then Kyler on these vertical routes, 36th in yards per attempt, 37th in adjusted net yards per attempt, 32nd in completion percentage over expected, and 24th in catchable throw percentage. Just not good. It's just a bad marriage of talents. I think that Marvin Harrison Jr. is a good player. Again, I think it's just a rough marriage of quarterback, OC, and Marv. It's just a tough spot. I wish I could say something more positive about a player I believe in. Same deal here, where I love Garrett Wilson. He is my favorite player, my favorite team, but I haven't really been drafting him. He's a good target earner. He gets open, but we saw last year he finishes the wide receiver 18 in points per game. I now have him wide receiver 20. He was wide receiver 18 attached to Aaron Rodgers, who wasn't good, but at least it was a high volume, somewhat accurate passing offense. Now you're going to have a low volume run first passing offense that's inaccurate from Justin Fields. And we already saw Garrett Wilson be top 5 in targets and only finish wide receiver 18. So like wide receiver 20 is about as high as I can put Garrett Wilson at this point. Then we have wide receiver 21, George Pickens. And this is the discount T. Higgins to me, especially with this Micah Parsons news. This just means that this defense is going to be awful without Micah Parsons. We're going to see a lot of shootouts, a lot of coming from behind for the Cowboys, a lot of pass attempts, a lot of dome games. I think this is the perfect situation where George Pickens goes from a Steelers offense that was 29th in pass attempts to a Cowboys offense that should be top 5 in pass attempts. So even being SSCD Lamb, there should be enough volume to go around that George Pickens can have the 2024 T. Higgins season where he finishes as a top 12 wide receiver despite being on the same team as CeeDee Lamb. After that, you get to wide receiver 22 with Xavier Worthy here. I am a fan. He gets a 6-game runway here with Rashee Rice suspended. And here's what's going to happen. He can fall somewhere in the middle, but to me, he's either really good and he carves out a role even when Rashee Rice returns, or he's bad and he was going to suck anyways, and then Rashee Rice comes in and completely supplants Xavier Worthy. Those are, to me, kind of the two outcomes here. I like to believe that I think Xavier Worthy can find his footing in this offense. He finished very strong last year. When we look at his final 209 routes from his last 7 games, he was at a 24.4% targets per out run, 2+ yards per out run, 10% plus first downs per out run, 84 PFF grade with a 21.6 point per game output. He was an absolute monster. That was, I believe, I think it was 15, 16, 17, 18 divisional conference Super Bowl, where he was just an absolute monster over those games. And I think that that is what we could see him be this season. Now, of course, we have Rashee Rice in our high-end wide receiver 3s category as my wide receiver 23 off the board. These are guys where I'd prefer them in my wide receiver 3 spot, right? A guy like Rashee Rice where you're not going to have him for the first 6 weeks. He is suspended, but over his last 15 games, he has averaged 17 points per game, and that would actually put him into this category, to be honest with you. So essentially, he would be here, but you got to stomach 6 games of him being on your bench. But if you can weather that storm, especially in leagues where 6 out of 12 make the playoffs, where, that's a 50% chance regardless, and it's pretty soft to get there. I think if you can just get some things to break right until Rashee Rice comes back, you can just sort of sneak a super team into the playoffs. Now, yes, I have Xavier Worthy ranked in the top 24. I have Rashee Rice ranked in the top 24. I refuse to believe that Mahomes is incapable of supporting 2 fantasy wide receivers inside the top 24. This is somebody who has supported Tyreek Hill's peak, Travis Kelce's peak, both at the same time. I'm just not of the idea that like Mahomes is washed or something like that. Then at wide receiver 24, we have Travis Hunter. And this is the range when we get to the high-end wide receiver 3s. And you'll see, yes, do I have my wide receiver 23 and wide receiver 24? Yes, but I don't believe in the cutoff of like, yes, when we look back at the season, the wide receiver 13 to 24 are your wide receiver 2s. But when I'm ranking them, it's really more about feel in terms of like putting them into my lineup, looking at my lineup. I would just prefer Travis Hunter and Rashee Rice in my wide receiver 3 spot. Of course, that's easy to say, but that's just kind of where I'm coming from here. And this is the range where I just want to take swings on rookie upside. Travis Hunter's here. I have him as my wide receiver 2 in my prospect model from the dynasty season. When you look across the board in terms of film score, breakout score, athleticism, efficiency score, all of the above, he comes out behind only Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., and JSN over the last 3 draft classes. On top of that, we already have quotes saying that Travis Hunter is going to be full-time on offense, easing in on defense. He should be good to go right away as the slot receiver in Liam Cohen's offense. And then same deal with Emeka Egbuka. He was my wide receiver 2 in this class by my prospect model, and he is going to have a similar runway here as the wide receiver 2 next to Mike Evans. Really good player. And like I said, I think that the Godwin injury is really rough, so we're going to see Egbuka have opportunity to be a difference maker right out the gate. You can put him in your lineup right out the gate. And I just can't get this out of my head. When Baker Mayfield talked about Egbuka, he said he can play all 3 wide receiver positions, that when Mike Evans was out for a day, he filled in at X and did absolutely fine. I think this is a player that wasn't able to show off his true potential due to stacked wide receiver rooms at Ohio State. And I think in the NFL, yes, he'll be next to Mike Evans, but especially early on, it will be all him in terms of slot, flanker, inside and out usage, motion before the play. He will be the guy getting a lot of the good looks in this offense. Then we get to my wide receiver 26. We have Zay Flowers. People are sleeping on Zay Flowers, man. Look at his per route metrics compared to these top dogs, right? Like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas Jr. He fits right in, man. 23.8% targets per out run, 10% plus first downs per out run, 2.25 yards per out run. This is a good player on a scoring offense projected to be inside the top 3 by Vegas. I get the concern, right? He doesn't really score touchdowns, but if they're going to score a ton of touchdowns and be an efficient offense, it wouldn't shock me if Zay Flowers just ended up with 8 or 9 touchdowns and had a really strong season. We've seen before, a guy like George Kittle, San Francisco scores a lot of touchdowns every year. He didn't score more than 6 touchdowns until his age 29 season, where he then scored 11 touchdowns. Touchdowns are kind of random. If Zay Flowers can hit a touchdown spike year as a third-year breakout candidate who can actually step forward and improve as a receiver, I think Zay Flowers could be a real difference maker as a true breakout this season. Then at wide receiver 27, we have Jameson Williams. He is interesting. He's tough to read. He's not a great target earner. He doesn't look good in reception perception, but I can't quit who he is as a player. He's still growing as a player. He's electric. He's on the Detroit Lions, who are going to score a lot of points. And I think the blueprint for him is kind of what Will Fuller was next to DeAndre Hopkins, if you guys remember that from back in the day. Of course, without the injuries that Will Fuller had, but Will Fuller was on pace as the wide receiver 8 in points per game in 2020 on the Texans. I think we could see something similar for Jameson Williams. I got to be honest, I don't remember if Hopkins was on that team, but Fuller had some fun years next to Hopkins. I just think in terms of player archetype, Jameson Williams is sort of similar from an efficiency, low target standpoint. Then at wide receiver 28, we have Jalen Waddle. H-Chan's banged up. Tyreek Hill, bad vibes across the board. If H-Chan and Tyreek Hill bust this year, Jalen Waddle will be the heart and soul of this offense, and I still believe that Jalen Waddle is a good player. Yes, he's been banged up in his career, but he is the 12th highest paid wide receiver in 2025. He's 26 years old, and we look at his per route metrics next to his 2021 wide receiver classmates. He looks pretty good. 2+ yards per out run, 22% targets per out run, 10% plus first downs per out run over his entire career. Those are really, really strong numbers over that large of a sample. I still believe he's a good player who's explosive and has plenty of upside in this offense. Then at wide receiver 29, we have Devontae Smith. Now, I think this is a good time to talk about my mindset with these rankings. These rankings are not how I believe that things will be finished at the end of the year. I think that is dumb. We are playing for upside. We are playing to win championships. I'm trying to find league winners. I'm not trying to get my wide receiver 24 to finish as the wide receiver 23. It's not really what I am looking for when it comes to fantasy football. It's why I think season-long contests of rankings are dumb, where if you are submitting a season-long rankings list for an accuracy contest, you are more hung up on finishing 4th than you are finishing 1st. So I understand that having Devontae Smith at wide receiver 29, he is going to outkick this coverage. He is going to finish as probably like your wide receiver 20 this year, but he doesn't have the upside that I'm chasing with these other picks like an Emeka Egbuka, like a Travis Hunter, who could completely dust him in the playoff weeks, in the weeks that matter most, or in their top percentile outcomes, completely dust him. So that's really what my mindset is. This is the order I would draft these players. These are my rankings for drafts. It is not my rankings for how they're going to finish at the end of the year. I understand that that is a little bit confusing because they should be coinciding with each other, but I slant things towards league winning upside because I want to win my league and not finish 4th place and have Fantasy Pros accuracy trophies behind me. I'm trying to win. So Devontae Smith to me represents that, where I know that he's going to finish higher than wide receiver 29, but he's in a low volume passing offense next to A.J. Brown. There's really not much more to go than finish somewhere between wide receiver 16 to 24, which is fine, but I'm just not in the business of hitting singles in like the 5th round of your fantasy draft. After that, same deal with Courtland Sutton. I don't see the upside. He's turning 30 this year. He was the wide receiver 24 in points per game last year. That was his only top 24 finish of his career. Yes, he's the wide receiver 1 on a good offense, but that's about all he offers you. I don't really see the top 12 upside appeal. He didn't clear the 65th percentile on any of the reception perception win rates. He was at the top 20 in targets per out run, yards per out run, and first downs per out run last year. He's fine, but people are drafting him at the top of this tier, and I just can't get there. At wide receiver 31, I have DK Metcalf. He's the clear number 1 on a bad offense. He has Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers did, though, just support 2 top 24 wide receivers in Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson. And there is definitely some touchdown upside for Metcalf if Rodgers does the same thing he did on the Jets, where he checks out of all the runs inside the 10-yard line. The Jets had the highest rate of pass percentage inside of the 10-yard line, which is absolutely nuts, but it's what he insists on doing. So DK Metcalf has pretty high touchdown upside. He has pretty high target upside as well, but I just don't know what the true ceiling is. He hasn't finished inside the top 20 wide receivers in points per game since 2020. So I just don't know at this point in his career that there's meat left on the bone, but it wouldn't shock me as a lifelong Jets fan if Rodgers did the Brett Favre in Minnesota last dance run and DK Metcalf was this year's Terry McLaurin. That's absolutely in his range of outcomes, and I will give him that. After that, we have DJ Moore, who is an interesting player. My wide receiver 32. He was wide receiver 9 in points per game in 2023. Last year was a disaster for the entire offense. I do think that there is a strong likelihood that Rome Odunze is just the better player and outscores him, but of course, you can't rank it that way. August 28th, I just have DJ Moore kind of buried here. I'm not really drafting him much. In terms of reception perception, he was outside of the, 65th percentile or worse across all 3 metrics. Rome Odunze looked much better across the board. I think that Rome Odunze will be the outside X, and DJ Moore will get some of the fun flanker slot stuff, but I think as the season goes on, we're going to see more of those touches get siphoned away to Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, with DJ Moore not in the long-term view of this team. At wide receiver 33, this is a really long tier, right? Like these 2 tiers especially are why I'm not crazy about taking JSN in the middle to early 3rd when these guys are all available in the next round. Not really Garrett Wilson, but you get what I'm saying. Like this whole cluster is why wide receiver is pretty deep and you can get values later on. But with Calvin Ridley, he could be this year's Terry McLaurin, I guess. But I would be shocked if Cam Ward got Ridley to 13 touchdowns like that. I think Calvin Ridley will finish top 5, top 10 in targets. He'll get volume. He's a fine volume-based top 24 finishing option. But again, I don't know if he will have a super meaningful like wide receiver 12 type finish from this spot. He should be just fine. I would prefer the younger upside swings ahead of him, though. Then we get to our wide receiver 3s tier. These guys aren't high end, but still guys that I feel fine in my wide receiver 3 spot with. First up, Rome Odunze, you just saw it. Really good per route reception perception metrics, 71st percentile versus man, 87th percentile versus press. I think that he is a really strong perimeter receiver in the NFL. You kind of have to throw out what happened in year 1. Rich Rebar had a really good stat from, I believe, Sharp Football Analysis that Rome Odunze ran 144 routes without a target. That means on 144 routes, either a sack, scramble, tipped pass, or throwaway resulted on the play, meaning that his per route metrics were never going to be good in that environment. That was about 25% of his routes. Also, about 44.8% of his total volume on the season was deemed uncatchable. Brutal season, but now we have Ben Johnson, year 2 Caleb Williams. He will go as far as Caleb Williams takes him, but I believe that could be a really nice high-end wide receiver 2 style finish for Rome Odunze in a true breakout season. Then we have Ricky Pearsall, another year 2 breakout candidate. He is pretty much the last man standing in this receiver room. You have Ayuk with the ACL. You have Jennings, calf/contract holdout. It's really just Ricky Pearsall. He's another guy like Odunze where I'm throwing out his rookie year stats. He was shot. That's as simple as you really have to say it for Slick Rick here. He's another guy who crushed his reception perception, 83rd percentile versus zone, 76th percentile versus press as a really savvy route runner as early as year 1, and he did finish the year strong. He had 8 catches, 141 yards, and a touchdown in week 17. In week 18, 6 catches, 69 yards, and a touchdown. After that, we have a rookie in Matthew Golden. He finds himself at this point as the wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas's 11th best projected scoring offense. Jaden Reed is in a boot. Romeo Doubs is in trade rumors. Well, I guess they already been the Micah Parsons trade, so I think Romeo Doubs is staying, I suppose. But Matthew Golden is going to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets, run all the routes, rookie upside attached to Jordan Love. I think that he is a great pick inside the top 36. Then we have wide receiver 37, just kind of a yucky, stinky wide receiver player here, but Olave is a really good player, man. I can't stress that enough. Next to his other classmates who are going 3 to 4 rounds ahead of him, he has a better career yards per out run than both Garrett Wilson and Drake London over their careers. 25.4% targets per out run matches Drake London. 10.9% first downs per out run matches Drake London. Olave is a stud. It just comes down to concussions, and it comes down to this passing offense being passable. Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough is a rough combo, but with Kellen Moore, they are projected for the 12th most pass attempts by Mike Clay. There should be enough volume, and Olave should be a good enough player attached to Kellen Moore to still be somebody you can start and feel good about in your wide receiver 3/flex spot. Then our last receiver in this tier is Jerry Jeudy. As like wide receiver 3s, I feel good about starting as soon as week 1. Similar deal as Olave. Not pretty. He's on the Browns, but Joe Flacco should keep things afloat here, I will say. Who knows how long until it's Dylan Gabriel's turn or it's Shedeur Sanders' turn, and that's when things could get really, really ugly for Jerry Jeudy. But until then, he was the wide receiver 21 in points per game last year. He was at 1,200 plus receiving yards. The only other receivers to hit 1,200 plus receiving yards, Jamar Chase, Jefferson, Brian Thomas, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, and Jerry Jeudy. So this is kind of why I don't value your Devontae Smith, Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley types, is because you can get the more boring options later, like a Jerry Jeudy, who also has a wide receiver 24 in points per game finish written all over him. It's not going to be super pretty, but he is somebody that is a high floor option as well much later in your drafts. Now we go to wide receiver 4s. These are guys that I'm not really trying to have start for me. Really, when we talk about strategy of fill your wide receiver spots through the flex plus 1 or 2, these guys are my plus 1 or 2 type options. First up at wide receiver 39, we have Jawan Jennings. Now, he's really difficult. He avoided the injury reserve, which is good, but he still hasn't signed a contract. There's still some calf issue stuff. I think most of it is around the contract, but this is somebody who was really good last year in terms of points per game. He was the wide receiver 25. He was the wide receiver 16 in yards per out run, wide receiver 14 in first downs per out run, wide receiver 12 in targets per out run, and the wide receiver 16 in PFF grade. And I have him now as my wide receiver 39, which feels more than fair in a good offense in San Francisco. Then we have Jordan Addison. Similar deal to Rashee Rice, where he would probably be for me in this area, if not for the suspension, but of course he gets suspended. He's going to be out for the first 3 weeks. Yes, do they trade for Adam Thielen? I'm not all that concerned about it. I think Adam Thielen will be fine, right? He'll probably be in that 600, 800-yard range as a slot receiver, but Addison has produced in this offense next to Justin Jefferson the entire time. I think that he should be absolutely fine. He was the wide receiver 22 in points per game last season. He should be somebody that flirts with wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 numbers this season. Wide receiver 41, we have Debo. It wouldn't shock me if he had a little bit of a bounce back here. He's in the same draft class as Terry McLaurin and DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown, who are all way up higher than this. If Deebo Samuel could bounce back in an offense with Cliff Kingsbury, who wants to feature him, where they trade away Brian Robinson, who yes is a big deal for Bill, and it's a big deal for Eckler, we're going to see a lot more Deebo rush attempts as well because of that move. And this is going to be a top 5 scoring offense. He's attached to Jaden Daniels. Cliff Kingsbury seems to want to use him in a manufactured touch role. So Deebo could be a guy who finishes way ahead of where I have him ranked here. Wide receiver 42, I have Stephon Diggs. Some people are really excited about him and have him in this area. He's 30 plus coming off an ACL tear. I have a really tough time buying into that. But he is Drake May's number 1 wide receiver. I understand that all the reports are positive and he looks great, but we'll see what it looks like when we put the pads on and he goes out there week 1 in this offense. Then at wide receiver 43, we have Jacoby Myers. This is a weird one because he's also another high floor option, right? Like he is probably going to sleepwalk his way to a wide receiver 25 to 30 finish, but he did request a trade. But I think he's just going to stay on the Raiders and be fine. Is kind of my overall outlook on that situation. At 44, we have Josh Downs. He hit 14 plus points per game, which would be like a mid wide receiver 2 season in his games without Anthony Richardson last year. Of course, now we have Daniel Jones starting at least early on in the season, and Josh Downs is a nice year 3 breakout candidate. I'll also put his teammate Pittman next to him, who had an injury-riddled season last year, but he should benefit from Daniel Jones. Before that, we've seen him hit 100-plus receptions as a fine wide receiver 2. He could easily bounce back. At 46, we have Shakir. Khalil Shakir is probably too low. He's a solid player on a high-end offense, but also he was the wide receiver 33 in points per game last season. Maybe he's tapped out, but also maybe he can push for like 1,000-plus yards and 8-plus touchdowns in this offense. They're just very run-heavy despite being a high-scoring offense. Then at wide receiver 47, we have Jaden Reed. If he was healthy, he'd be somewhere in like this area, but he's got some weird stuff going on. He might even be too highly ranked here. This is kind of the report from Matthew Betts here. A few thoughts on the Jaden Reed Jones fracture. So he has a Jones fracture. I think that's like the bottom of the pinky toe. It's not good. They're going with a non-surgical approach. Docs wouldn't let him play / practice if the break wasn't showing signs of healing. Question for me is, when did the fracture happen? If recent high re-injury risk in season, what stresses the fifth? I mean, now we're getting crazy, but I don't know. He said highly volatile situation heading into the season, assuming these reports are accurate. So I don't know. I don't know if he plays week 1. He's going to have high risk of re-injuring things during the season. Things are getting very spooky with Jaden Reed. So that's where I have him, wide receiver 47. Then we get to my depth pieces. And here we have Luther Burden as my wide receiver 48. And this is where I'm swinging on upside. When we look at the league winners in fantasy football over the last 8 or so weeks of the season, right from weeks 9 on of a fantasy football season, a lot of times rookie wide receivers come alive. Or we've seen Elijah Moore hit 20-plus points per game here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 19-plus. Tank Dell, 18.9. We've seen Brian Thomas last year at 17.8 points per game over this stretch. Waddle, 17.5. Ladd, 16.6. Even Jaden Reed, who we just mentioned, 16.2 points per game over the final stretch of his rookie year as a legitimate league winner. I think Luther Burden presents that upside. He's a rookie prospect that I like a ton. He was a top 40 pick. He finds himself on a Chicago Bears offense that should be fun this year. Similar deal with Jaden Higgins, rookie upside, top 40 pick, attached to CJ Stroud. 50th, we have Cooper Kupp. I don't know. He's probably washed. He's been on a steady decline at this point. He's the second option in a run-heavy offense, but I don't know. There is some upside that he is still Cooper Kupp. I would be shocked, though. Then we have Keon Coleman, year 2 breakout potential on this Bills offense, but he had a pretty rough year 1, and he's kind of playing out of position as a true X wide receiver there. Then we have wide receiver 52, Rashid Shaheed. He was a top 24 wide receiver before injury last year, but now we have a brutal quarterback situation next to Chris Olave. We'll see how that goes. 53, Darnell Mooney is dealing with an injury that might have him out week 1, but he should be solid. He was wide receiver 34 in points per game last season. He's absolutely a wide receiver flex, low-end wide receiver 3 style option if healthy and if Penix can go. Then we have Chris Godwin. This is where I would put him, despite knowing, yes, like week 5 or later is rough. But at a certain point, like it's getting pretty bare in terms of names here. So if you want to take him, stash him on your IR, and like maybe by fantasy playoffs, he's usable. He is out there. Or actually, you know what? Live on camera here, we're actually going to put Ayuk ahead, because I think Ayuk is actually kind of safer. I feel better about Ayuk's ACL than I do about Chris Godwin and his injury. So actually, we're going to put Ayuk ahead of Godwin, where I think Ayuk, yes, he tore his ACL. Maybe he'll be back later, but I think it'll be a more smooth recovery, where Godwin has a lot more questions about how his recovery has been. There was a setback and a surgery, and things are all over the place for him, and the reports have only gotten worse despite missing out on the PUP list. Then we have a wide receiver 56, Marvin Mims. He's been great on a per-route basis. We now have Devon Vele out of town, but I've seen this story before where somebody has an amazing yards per route run, an amazing targets per route run, but on like 40% of the routes, and then if that gets ratcheted up to 80% plus of the routes, it's not going to carry over 1-for-1. He has some year 3 breakout potential here, but I would be wary of Marvin Mims. Then we get to our high floor options of Keenan Allen first at wide receiver 57. He was the wide receiver 31 last year. He is a high floor option attached to Justin Herbert. He's somebody where if you draft a Rashee Rice or an Addison, you can definitely prioritize Keenan Allen as an early season producer. Same vibe with Christian Kirk. He's been solid over his career. He should be an early season starter for the Texans. Then we have Jalen Coker, wide receiver 59, more of an upside play here. Thielen's gone. Coker had a better yards per out run and a better first downs per out run than every rookie wide receiver not named Brian Thomas, Lad McConkey, or Malik Neighbors. He was an absolute stud last year, and I think Thielen getting traded pretty much puts it in stone that Jalen Coker is going to matter this season. And then our final rookie upside pick is Kyle Williams, upside swing attached to Drake May, but he could absolutely be an absolute zero this season. But that is going to do it for us today. That is my top 60 wide receiver tier list, the deepest we've ever gone in record time, 40 minutes, damn near on the dot. As always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new. In my final top 200 cheat sheet for you guys to use in your drafts this weekend or in your drafts this week, check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. Use my top 200 rankings, my tiers, my target round for every player. So if you have a question of like, okay, well, Nico Collins is your wide receiver 5, but how do you like him versus a guy like Ashton Genty? Those answers are all found on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. Only $10. Go win your draft. Use the rankings I use myself. But if not, appreciate y'all watching. Subscribe, leave a like, and I'll see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm